You can't budget your way out of not making enough money. Simple as. I This is something that is very personal to me, but in you see this in comment sections. A lot of people will talk about, "Oh my god, I just don't have enough money," sort of thing. People say you got to budget better and watch how you spend and save where you can. And I mean, all of that is the pretty standard boilerplate advice, but the simple reality is for a lot of people is, given all the expenses of living in this country, it's very hard to live on not a lot of money. I remember years ago in the 2008 recession, I was working as a freelance writer at the time. And I basically had this problem where I was getting a lot of work and a lot of projects, but I was not getting paid for them. People would ghost, people were losing everything, couldn't pay, businesses were going under. I remember my landlord, who was also a tax attorney and also did my taxes, was like, "You're doing lots of work. You have so many outstanding invoices." I think at one time I had 50K in outstanding invoices. He's like, "Just no one's paying you." Um, and I remember kind of, being on the phone with my parents, and they were being like, "You need to budget better. You need to budget your money." And my response was, "What money?" And I remember falling, literally collapsing on the phone with my dad in the hallway in my little basement apartment, being like, "I don't know how to budget no money. There's no money. How do I budget that?" How, like, when you have some money, yeah, there's a lot you can do, but when you don't have it, you don't have it. And the reality is, it's very easy if you're making, 15, 18, $20 an hour. You add in housing, car expenses, it's very, health insurance expenses. If you have children, oh god, like, it's very easy for money to just kind of fly away. Going to a grocery store these days, oh my goodness, what used to cost $100, a couple years ago, is now 200, 220, you know and that's even before you get into taxes and whether you owe or not. Fun fact: Trump did pay for a Trump tax cut by taxing the middle class. People don't know that. There was a temporary tax cut that sunset about 2 years ago, and everyone is paying more taxes and getting less refunds. And it's like, yeah, yeah, Trump gave his corporate buddies tax cuts, and you got the bill. But the sad reality is, the only thing that helps people survive and thrive is rising productivity and rising wages over time. And those, wages should well exceed the rate of inflation, so that people can continue to be able to make money, save money, get ahead, handle basic expenses. We live in a country where most people cannot take on an emergency $400 expense. If they had an emergency today and it would cost $400, a majority of the country would not have the money to be able to deal with that. Is that a personal problem, or is that a systemic failure? Is that years of wages being suppressed? In my book, What the Hell is Going On, I talk about this in my essay 1977, The Rise of Discounters and Deregulation. And one of the things Alan Greenspan, who was used to be the chair of the Fed, did is he kind of doped up the American consumer on two things: easy credit, in the terms of consumer credit cards, which started in the late 80s and the 90s, and inexpensive goods from due to cheap labor in China. And that covered over the fact that wages in this country, until the pandemic, really haven't grown that much. And if we were on, if we were on track, the average wage in this country would be about 35, $36 an hour. If the minimum wage were tracked to inflation, would be about $22 an hour. So the sad fact and sad reality is that wages have been suppressed for a very long time. It's just now, and this has been true for some time, but for a lot of people, the bud's off the rose, the water's off the lily. It's obvious now, the easy credit and cheap goods are not going to make up for poor wages. That's not going to help you when the cost of housing is so high. Don't go to try to buy a car right now. All this type of thing, especially now with it was bad before the pandemic. People were struggling. Now we have the inflation. People who weren't struggling before are now struggling. All of this, what does this all add up to? You can't budget your way out of not enough money. And there's a systemic aspect, and there is a corporate greed aspect to this. And there's many things that we can do to slow that down and put a halt on that. But the sad reality is, there's no budget in the world that's going to solve a not enough money problem. Now, people will come into the comments and they will say, but Cameron, people spend money so efficiently and so terribly and all this type of thing. Yes, of course they do. And we can probably find examples in our friends and whatnot of people who make bad money decisions. But the reality is, you're probably underpaid compared to the value of productivity you produce, to the value of productivity we as a society produce. And where does that money gone, you ask? It has gone into the pockets of the 1%. It's gone into every corporate stock, and every executive stock package. It's gone into ever increasing dividends. It's gone into all of these things where the wealth is being extracted from people. And that gets into this money getting poured into asset classes that may be falling apart, like derivatives. It gets poured into real estate, causing real estate to increase. It gets poured into all these different things, and it ends up causing a bubble. And I always laugh because when they talk about UBI and this sort of thing, I always be like, yeah, well, if you give people money, they'll just spend it. Yeah, that's the point. Like when money goes to a wealthy person, it becomes inert. It ceases to move. It doesn't really move. Well, they don't actually spend that much money. It tends not to move through the economy. When you give it to the middle class and the poor, they spend it because they have things to buy, things to do, all this type of thing. And I always say, see, corporations cut off their own nose to spite their face, because what they don't realize is if people had slightly more money, they would end up with a portion of it anyway, because people would spend it at stores and on vacations and activities, and they would still make money. They might make ever so slightly less than they used to. And I've always said corporations should be happy with 5 to 8% profit a year and be content, because that was kind of the standard before the 1980s. And we got into shareholder value and all this type of thing. But they should be happy with their 5 to 8% a year and be fine. They're still going, like, the wealthy will still be wealthy. The rich will still be rich. It's just that everyone else will do slightly better. And that has all sorts of wonderful societal knock-on effects. That means more kids go to college into the skilled trades. That means people can stay home, and when you have a stay-at-home parent, people will choose maybe to have more children. You end up with people being able to thrive, build, buy that house, which then causes more consumer spending, build a community in other ways, be able to volunteer, be able to participate in society, be able to do more than scrape by and survive. And that, unfortunately, is what a lot of people these days are doing. That's a sad reality. The point is, you don't have a bad budget, you're just underpaid.